Felix Nolan didn't expect his Tuesday morning to start with a stroller barreling toward his shins, but here he was halfway up the subway stairs, arms full of grocery bags, when a blonde woman in a rush lost control of her toddler stroller. "Whoa, got it!" Felix dropped the bags without a second thought and lunged forward just in time, catching the front wheels before they hit the edge. The woman froze, wide-eyed, clutching a little boy on her hip. "Oh my God. Thank you. I thought he was just kicking and I couldn't grip it. Thank you." Felix steadied the stroller and looked up. She was stunning in a completely effortless way: messy bun, jeans, a soft beige coat, no makeup, but her green eyes locked onto his face like she'd just seen something unexpected. "No problem," he said, brushing off his jeans. "Those subway stairs are a nightmare with kids. I've been there." The boy in her arms, maybe two, with a mop of brown curls and a tiny pacifier, peered at him curiously. "I'm Taylor," she said, shifting the boy as she offered her hand. "This is Will." Felix took her hand, rough from years of carpentry work. "Felix. And mine's Wyatt. He's 6. At school now." Taylor looked down at the crumpled bags at his feet, cans rolling out across the steps. She quickly bent to help him. "You didn't have to stop. You had your hands full." "Wasn't gonna let a stroller tumble down a staircase," Felix said, stuffing crushed cereal boxes back into the bag. "That's a terrible headline." She laughed softly, and the sound was warm and real. "Still, thank you." Felix lifted the stroller with one hand and gestured toward the top of the stairs with the other. "Let me carry that up for you. I don't want inconvenience, not a problem. I've done this dance 100 times. She hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Okay, thanks." At the top, she tried digging into her purse for something. "At least let me buy you a coffee or something. Seriously." He shook his head. "You don't have to. I want to." Felix glanced at the time on his cracked watch. He had 30 minutes before his next job, patching drywall in some office uptown. His boots were already dusty, his flannel shirt wrinkled, and he hadn't shaved in 3 days. This woman looked like she belonged in a catalog, not in his world. But still. "All right," he said. "There's a place across the street. They've got decent espresso." Taylor smiled, and everything about her shifted, like something in her relaxed. "Perfect." She tucked Will into the high chair and handed him a little snack cup of crackers. Felix watched her how she moved, always aware of her son, always calm. He remembered those days with Wyatt, diapers and tantrums and pure exhaustion. "You live around here?" she asked, sipping her cappuccino. "Queens. You?" "Upper East Side." He blinked. "That's a bit of a ride." Taylor shrugged, brushing a crumb off Will's cheek. "Had an errand." "I used to live in this area." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "I used to work construction around here, before things slowed down." Taylor tilted her head. "You're in construction?" "Carpentry. Fixing up things mostly. People call when their cabinets fall off the walls or the ceiling's got a leak. Nothing glamorous." "It's honest work," she said, and meant it. Felix studied her again. She didn't have a ring on. No mention of a husband. And she wasn't just beautiful, she was kind. Grounded. "You do anything for work?" he asked. Taylor hesitated. "I help run a company. Family business." He nodded, not pressing. "Cool." They chatted until Will started to fuss. Taylor stood, gathering her things. "I should get him home for a nap. But it was really nice meeting you, Felix." "You too." She paused. "Do you want to meet again? Maybe let the kids have a play date." It was the last thing he expected. "Yeah, that'd be great." She dug into her bag and scribbled something on a napkin, an address and a time. "There's a park on 78th. We'll be there Saturday morning." He took the napkin, surprised. "I'll bring Wyatt." As she left, he watched her cross the street, Stroller swaying, her son babbling. He didn't know she'd stepped into a black SUV waiting at the corner, or that the man who opened the door was her driver, or that she lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park. By Saturday, Wyatt had asked him about the lady with the baby 3 times that morning. Felix tugged his son's coat tighter. "You ready?" Wyatt nodded, clutching his beat-up dinosaur toy. The park was already buzzing when they got there. Taylor sat on a bench near the swings, while toddling in front of her. She stood when she saw them. "Hey," she said, her smile lighting up her face. "You made it." Felix smiled. Never back out on a dinosaur date. Wyatt and Will took to each other surprisingly fast, and soon they were chasing each other across the wood chips. Taylor watched them, then glanced sideways. "So, you're a single dad?"
"Yeah."
Wyatt's mom left when he was 2. Said she wasn't cut out for it. Taylor's expression softened. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "We're good now. It's just the 2 of us." She nodded. "Same here." Will's father. Well, he never really showed up. They sat in silence for a moment before Taylor asked, "Do you ever get time for yourself?" Felix laughed. "What's that?" She smiled. "Same." Over the next hour, they talked. Easy, honest conversation. No pretending. Just 2 people who understood what it was like to raise a kid alone. As the boys played, Taylor turned to him. "Listen, I'm having some people over next weekend."
"Just a small thing."
"You and Wyatt should come." Felix raised a brow. "You sure? I'm not exactly party material." She gave him a look. "You saved my stroller, remember? You're on the VIP list." He chuckled.
"All right."
"We're in." What she didn't tell him was that this small thing was a private fundraiser hosted on the rooftop of her building. That her last name, Taylor Ashford, was attached to a billion-dollar tech company. That the champagne was flown in from France, and the guest list included CEOs and senators. She didn't tell him because she didn't want to scare him off. But when Felix showed up the next Saturday, holding Wyatt's hand in one and a small bouquet of grocery store flowers in the other, and saw the glass elevator, the marble lobby, the men in suits, he froze.
"This
is the place?" he asked. Taylor appeared in the doorway in a navy dress that looked like it cost more than his rent. "Hi," she said, breathless. "I'm so glad you came." Felix stared. "You live here?" She nodded. "I thought you said I didn't lie," she said, stepping closer. "I said I help run the family business. I just didn't say what kind of business." He looked around, overwhelmed. Wyatt tugged at his hand, sensing the tension. Taylor reached for his other hand. "Please don't leave." He looked at her, Owl toddling over in tiny dress shoes, at the way her eyes searched his nervous, hopeful. "I've never brought anyone into this world of mine," she said quietly. "But I wanted you here." Felix swallowed hard. "I feel
different around you," she added.
"like I can breathe." He looked down at Wyatt, then back at her. "Okay," he said. "We'll stay." Taylor's shoulders dropped with relief. "Good." And just like that, the night began with one poor dad and one billionaire, standing in a world neither of them fully belonged to, but slowly realizing they might just belong with each other. Felix hadn't stepped onto a rooftop with a view like this since he helped install solar panels on a luxury condo during a job 5 years ago. But even then, he'd been wearing a harness and a hard hat, not the one decent button-down shirt he owned, and jeans that barely passed for formal. The skyline stretched in every direction, shimmering like a living painting. Strings of soft golden lights crisscrossed above the crowd, casting a warm glow over the rooftop's polished stone floor. Small tables with white linens and flickering candles framed the space. A string quartet played something elegant near the far corner. Felix took it all in cautiously, his grip tightening on Wyatt's hand. The boy looked around, wide-eyed but calm, sensing this wasn't a place he could run wild. "Come on," Taylor said gently, placing a hand on Felix's back to guide him toward a quieter section. There's a spot where the kids can play. I hired a sitter for the evening. He followed her through the crowd, ignoring the sideways glances from men in tailored jackets and women in flowing gowns. One man did a double take when he saw Taylor guiding Felix toward the reserved area, but she didn't acknowledge any of it. She simply opened a small gate to a glassed-in side lounge where a young woman in her 20s waited beside a table full of toys and juice boxes. "Wyatt, this is Miss Hannah," Taylor told him. "She's going to hang out with you, and while we talk to some very boring grown-ups." "Is that okay?" Wyatt looked up at Felix. "You'll be all right, bud. I'll be right outside." Felix knelt to straighten his son's collar. "Be nice, okay?" Wyatt nodded, then wandered toward the toy table where Will was already stacking wooden blocks. Taylor closed the gate behind them and let out a breath. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," she admitted, walking toward the balcony railing. "I wasn't sure either," Felix replied, joining her. Down below, Central Park stretched out like a dark velvet blanket, speckled with the occasional twinkle of lamplight. Horns blared faintly in the distance, but up here, it felt like another world. Isolated. Untouchable. "Do you do this often?" he asked, nodding toward the crowd. "Only when I have to. These are mostly investors. Donors. People who want to be reminded that we're still the darlings of the tech world." "And you're the face of it all?" "My brother's the face," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm the backbone: operations, logistics, partnerships. The things no one applauds, but everything would collapse without." Felix leaned on the railing. "Sounds like you've got more on your shoulders than most." Taylor didn't respond right away. "Sometimes I wish I could disappear for a while. Just take Will and live somewhere quiet.
No meetings.
No press. No pressure to keep everyone convinced we're still innovating." "You could," he said simply. She glanced sideways. "You think. If you really wanted to, you just have to decide what matters more." Taylor studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to understand how someone like him, someone without half her resources, could speak with such certainty. Before she could respond, a voice called out from behind them. "Taylor, there you are." A man in his late 30s approached, tall, lean, with the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. His suit was sleek, his hair perfectly styled, and his tone casually possessive. Felix stepped back instinctively. "Gavin," Taylor said, her voice flattening. "Didn't realize you were coming. Last-minute decision. I figured I should show support, especially now that the press is sniffing around for the next big headline." He turned to Felix, eyes scanning quickly. "And you are?" "Felix Nolan," he replied, offering his hand. Gavin didn't take it. "Taylor, I didn't know we were opening up these events to the general public." "Felix's son and Will are friends," Taylor said, her tone cool and clipped. "He's here as my guest." Gavin's smile didn't budge, but something flickered behind his eyes.
"Ah, I see. Well,
enjoy the view." He walked off without another word. Felix exhaled. "Friend of yours?" "Ex-fiancé," Taylor muttered. Felix blinked. "Seriously? About 6 months ago. My family liked him."
I didn't."
"Seems like he's still trying to stake a claim." "He's not used to hearing no." Taylor turned back toward the city. "I should have ended it sooner, but things were complicated. You don't owe me an explanation." "I know," she said, glancing at him. "But I want to give you one." Felix held her gaze, surprised by the rawness in her voice. "I didn't invite you here to parade you around or prove anything to anyone," she continued. "I just wanted you to see me, the real version. The one who runs a company, hosts ridiculous parties, and still spills coffee on her shirt during morning meetings." He chuckled softly. "You didn't spill today." "Only because I changed twice." They both laughed, and for a moment, the tension dissolved. Later that night, Felix wandered inside to grab a soda he didn't drink and found himself cornered by a woman in a red dress near the bar. "You must be the carpenter," she said, sipping her wine without looking at him. "Word travels fast. It does in circles like these," she said, turning toward him. "You know she's not really looking for anything serious, right? Excuse me?"
Taylor. She brings people in.
Lets them feel special. Then moves on. It's part of the charm. Don't take it personally. Felix didn't respond. He just walked away. Outside, Taylor was sitting on a sofa near the fire pit, her shoulders curled forward like the weight of the night had finally settled. He sat beside her. "You all right?" he asked. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For letting you walk into this world without warning. For not preparing you for the people who think I belong to them." Felix thought for a moment. "I don't care what they think." She looked at him again, this time with something closer to disbelief. "I care what you think," he added. "And if this is your world, then I'll deal with it. But only if it doesn't change who you are when we're outside of it." Taylor's fingers brushed his. "That version of me, the one on the subway, with cracker crumbs in her coat pocket, she's the real one." "Then, that's the one I want to know." Neither of them spoke after that. They just sat in silence as the fire crackled, the city glowing around them like a promise neither of them had expected. When it was time to leave, Taylor walked him to the elevator. "Thank you for coming," she said, pausing before the doors opened. "Thanks for asking. Will I see you again?" He met her eyes. "You'll see me." As the doors closed between them, Felix glanced down at Wyatt asleep in his arms and wondered how a single act of kindness on a subway staircase had brought him here to a rooftop above Manhattan, with a woman he wasn't supposed to have anything in common with, yet somehow couldn't stop thinking about. If this was the beginning of something, it didn't feel like a fairy tale. It felt real. Felix adjusted the toolbox under his arm and knocked once on the heavy oak door before letting himself into the apartment. It still felt strange entering a space like this with its soaring ceilings and gallery walls without needing a badge or a clipboard. But Taylor had insisted. "You shouldn't be fixing cabinet hinges on your weekend," she had said 2 days earlier, standing in the middle of her kitchen in bare feet, coffee in hand. "But if you're going to do it, at least let me pay you." He hadn't answered then. Not because he didn't want the money, he always wanted the money, but because it had started to feel different with her. Like every hour he spent in her orbit meant more than cash. "Kitchen," Taylor called from a hallway. "And don't touch the light switch by the fridge. It's been shocking people." "I'll look at that too," Felix said, rounding the corner into the sleek, open kitchen. What kind of place has a vendetta against its own residents? "The expensive kind," she replied, brushing past him to grab a sippy cup from the counter. Will sat in a booster seat at the island, stacking plastic blocks while humming to himself. The nanny, a newer girl named Camila, sat nearby with a tablet half watching. Felix crouched beneath the sink, tugging the cabinet door off its hinge. "You know, I've seen better craftsmanship in a garden shed." Taylor leaned against the marble counter, sipping from her mug. "That's because you built that garden shed." He laughed under his breath. "Fair." She set her cup down. "I've been thinking about something. If it's about replacing this kitchen, you should know I'm fully booked until the next century."
"No," she said.
"Something else. Will's been asking about friends lately. More than usual. I think he's starting to understand that our life isn't typical." Felix straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "You mean the part where you live in a penthouse and have a driver named Maurice?" "No," she said, narrowing her eyes. "The part where we don't have a normal routine. I work strange hours, and he spends most of his time with nannies and tutors. He doesn't have a real community." Felix leaned against the counter beside her. "You thinking preschool?" "I'm thinking something simpler. Something steady." She hesitated. "There's a charter school on the East River. Mixed income model. Strong academics, real diversity. They have a parent-led afternoon program. Gardening, carpentry, storytelling, all kinds of things. He raised a brow. Sounds like you already filled out the application. I did. For Will. But I also asked if they could use another volunteer. She looked at him. They said yes. You want me to teach kids how to drill holes in wood? I want you to share the thing you're best at. Wyatt's already enrolled there, right? You could come in once a week. Work with the kids. They'd learn from someone who knows how to build things that last. Felix hesitated. You sure you want our worlds mixing like that? She stepped closer. They already are. He looked down at her at the certainty in her expression, so different from the cautious reserve she'd worn the first few times they met, and felt something shift. I'll think about it, he said. Her hand brushed his. That's all I ask. Later that evening, they took the boys to the park again, but this time it wasn't a carefully chosen Manhattan playground. It was a scrappy little space near Felix's apartment in Queens, where the ground was mostly dirt and the swing chain squeaked if you pushed too hard. Taylor sat beside him on a chipped wooden bench, her coat pulled tight against the early spring chill. You grew up around here? She asked, watching Will and Wyatt climb the slide. Couple blocks over. My mom still lives in the same apartment. Rent controlled. 3rd floor walk up. You visit her often? Every Sunday. She makes this stew that's mostly potatoes and salt, but it tastes like home. Taylor smiled. My mother hasn't cooked a meal since I was 12. She says kitchens are for staff. Felix chuckled. That explains a lot. I used to think she was joking. Then I realized she wasn't. He glanced sideways. You ever wish things had been different? All the time, she said softly. But I also know I wouldn't be who I am without it. Felix nodded. Same here. They sat in silence for a while, watching the boys take turns pretending the slide was a rocket ship. Then Taylor asked, Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if life had gone another way? He didn't answer right away. I used to want to design furniture. Custom stuff. Never had the time. Or the money. Why not start now? He gave her a look. You think I've got spare hours lying around? No, she said. But maybe I can help make some. He raised an eyebrow. You offering me a job? I'm offering you a workshop, she said. We have space in one of our downtown buildings. It's mostly unused. If you wanted to build a few pieces, try selling them. Test the waters, I'd cover the overhead. Felix leaned back, stunned. That's not a small offer. It's not a handout either, she said. It's a partnership. You do the work. I just give you the space to do it. He looked at her for a long moment. Why? Because I believe in people who build things. And because I believe in you. That night, after he tucked Wyatt into bed and cleaned the last dish from dinner, Felix sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the napkin Taylor had once scribbled her number on. He still kept it, even though he didn't need it anymore. It reminded him of something that felt real in the middle of everything that didn't. He thought about the rooftop party, about Gavin's dismissive sneer, about the woman at the bar who warned him to keep his heart guarded. He wasn't sure what scared him more, that they had a point, or that they didn't. The next week, he visited the charter school. The principal gave him a tour, showed him the woodshop corner tucked behind the art room. The tools were old, the storage bins half-labeled, the workbench sagging from years of use. But it had potential. I could fix this up, he said. I hoped you'd say that, the principal replied. He signed up for Thursday afternoons. 2 hours a week. Just enough to start. After the first class, he found Taylor waiting outside with 2 coffees and a laugh in her throat. You've got sawdust on your eyebrow, she said, brushing it away without asking. Occupational hazard. Will said you taught them how to make birdhouses. There were more nails in the table than in the wood, but yeah. She handed him the coffee. I've never seen him light up like that. He took a sip. You're making this real easy to like you, you know. Taylor tilted her head. That a bad thing? He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him gave way.
No, he said.
It's not. As spring edged closer, the days stretched longer, and their lives began to overlap in ways neither of them had planned. Weekends became shared breakfasts, afternoons at the park, evenings watching movies with the boys curled between them on the couch. Taylor cooked once a questionable stir-fry that Felix pretended to enjoy, and Felix taught her how to use a power drill without flinching. They never defined what was happening, but it was happening. And then, one night, Taylor invited him to her brother's birthday gala. It's going to be ridiculous, she warned. But I want you there. Felix hesitated. You sure this won't cause problems?
Let them talk, she said.
I'm not hiding anymore. He showed up in a suit she insisted on having tailored for him, and when he stepped into the ballroom, heads turned. But he didn't care. Because when Taylor crossed the floor to take his hand, smiling like she'd won something worth more than any stock option or public accolades, he knew. She wasn't just falling for him. She already had. Felix stood in the middle of the unfinished workshop, the scent of sawdust hanging thick in the air. A half-constructed bench lay in front of him, the walnut still raw, the legs uneven. Normally, he'd be in his rhythm by now, tape measure in one hand, pencil behind his ear, mind quiet. But not today. Today, he couldn't stop thinking about the gala. Not the tuxedo, or the way people had stared like he was some novelty dropped in from another planet. Not even the moment Taylor had introduced him to her brother, who looked at him with a neutral politeness that felt more like a challenge than a welcome.
It was what happened after.
The ride back to her place had been silent, the city humming around them as the driver maneuvered through traffic. Wyatt had fallen asleep in the back next to Will, their heads tipped toward each other. Taylor hadn't said much, just held Felix's hand with a quiet grip that said more than words ever could. But when they got upstairs and the nanny took both boys to bed, she'd stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, a glass of water on the counter untouched. He's going to try to stop this, she'd said. Your brother? Felix had asked, leaning against the doorframe. He thinks I'm being reckless. That I'm risking the company's image. That I'm making decisions based on emotion. Felix had waited, letting her gather her thoughts. He's wrong, she'd added. But he's powerful, and he knows how to make things difficult. Felix had stepped closer. You want me to back off? Her eyes had flared, sharp with frustration.
No.
That's not what I want. I just want you to understand what you're walking into. I already do. Do you? She'd asked, voice low. Because this isn't going to be easy. There's going to be noise. Pressure. People assuming things they have no right to. And I don't want you, or Wyatt, caught in the crossfire. He'd studied her then, the tightness in her shoulders, the way her jaw locked like she was bracing for a fight. I've worked in crawl spaces with mold thick enough to choke you, he'd said. I've raised a kid from diapers on my own. I've had my power shut off in the dead of winter, and still managed to keep my son warm. You think a few people with money and opinions scare me? Taylor had blinked, and for a second, all that tension eased. No, she'd said. I don't think anything scares you. Now, in the quiet of the workshop, Felix ran a hand over the edge of the bench and exhaled. The truth was, something did scare him. Not the wealth, not the judgment, not even the looming shadow of her family's influence. It was the idea that he might not belong in her world at all. He heard the front door open and footsteps echo across the floor. Taylor appeared in the doorway, her coat damp from the drizzle outside, cheeks flushed from the cold. Hey, she said, stepping inside. I brought lunch. He set down the chisel and wiped his hands. You didn't have to do that. I know, but I wanted to. She unpacked 2 containers and set them on the workbench. Felix noticed she'd brought his favorite roast chicken with sweet potatoes, the kind he once mentioned he used to make for Wyatt when groceries were tight. I talked to the board this morning, she said, opening a bottle of water. And they want a meeting. Next week. To discuss public optics and my recent choices. Felix leaned back against the edge of the table. Meaning me. Meaning us. He nodded slowly. What do you want to do? I want to tell them the truth, she said. That this isn't some fling. That I'm not apologizing for finally being happy. Felix looked at her, the way her chin lifted despite the storm clearly gathering behind her eyes. You sure you're ready to go to war with people who sign your paychecks? I sign theirs, she said. They just forget that sometimes. He grinned. Remind them gently. She smiled for the first time that day. Later that afternoon, they picked up the boys from school together. Will ran to Taylor the second he saw her, while Wyatt walked beside Felix, quiet and thoughtful. In the car, Wyatt leaned forward from his booster seat. Is Miss Taylor gonna be my stepmom? Felix turned around. Where'd you hear that? Some kids were talking. Said if you kiss someone at a party, that means you're getting married. Taylor glanced at Felix, eyes wide with amusement. Well, Felix said, kissing doesn't always mean marriage, but it does mean I like her a lot. Wyatt nodded, as if that settled the matter. Okay, I like her too. That night, Felix found Taylor in her reading nook, curled up with a thick legal folder in her lap. She looked up as he entered, hair pulled into a loose twist, glasses slipping down her nose. I think I know how to handle the board, she said. I've been doing some reading. Felix sat across from her. You sure you want to keep fighting this hard? I'm not fighting them for the sake of it, she replied. I'm fighting for the right to choose my life. He watched her for a moment. You always this stubborn? I've been called worse. He leaned forward. Then let me help. She closed the folder. How? Make it official, he said. Us. Not just dates and sleepovers and co-parenting afternoons. I mean real. Permanent. No loopholes. Her breath caught. Are you asking me what I think you're asking? I don't have a ring right now, he said. But I'm working on something. Something I'm carving myself. Taylor stood slowly, crossing the room until she was inches from him. You don't need a ring to ask, she whispered. He reached for her hands. Marry me? Yes, she said, eyes shining. Yes. The next morning, the story broke. Photos of them from the gala, arms linked, Felix in his tailored suit, Taylor glowing beside him. The headline wasn't subtle. Billionaire heiress trades fortune for Brooklyn carpenter? There were opinion pieces, interviews with anonymous sources, and a viral thread dissecting everything from Felix's wardrobe to Taylor's decision to date outside her class. The board demanded a closed-door meeting. Taylor walked in wearing a navy power suit and no apology. Felix waited in the hallway. 2 hours later, she emerged, her expression unreadable. Felix stood, heart thudding. They tried to give me an ultimatum, she said. Step back from the company or step back from you. He swallowed. And I told them neither. And then I reminded them that the shares in my name aren't just symbolic. I own controlling interest. Felix blinked. They really didn't know who they were dealing with. They do now. That weekend, they took the boys to Taylor's family estate upstate. Not for the luxury or the view, but because she wanted them to see something solid. Something that belonged to all 4 of them now. They stood on the porch that night, watching fireflies dance over the long grass. You scared? She asked. A little, he admitted. I never thought I'd be the guy who fits into a life like this. You're not, she said. You're the guy who made this life worth living. He turned to her, threading his fingers through hers. I love you. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his. I know. I love you too. The wedding was small, just close friends, family, and the 2 boys standing proudly in matching suits, one holding the rings, the other holding a hand-painted sign that read, Our family starts here. Felix wore a suit he'd saved for. Taylor wore a dress she'd found in a quiet boutique tucked between a deli and a bookstore. There were no press cameras.
No headlines.
Just vows whispered beneath a canopy of trees, and two people who'd found something extraordinary in the middle of an ordinary moment. Felix carried her across the threshold of a cabin he'd built with his own hands, the first piece in what would become a new life they built together. No longer just a poor dad. No longer just a billionaire heiress. Just two people in love, with nothing left to prove. Felix stood in the corner of the sunroom, measuring the length of the window seat he'd promised to build for Taylor, a quiet space she could curl up in with a book, overlooking the garden they'd started together just outside. The cherrywood planks leaned against the wall beside him, each one hand selected from a mill upstate. It wasn't just about function. It was about giving her a place that felt like hers, inside a home that now belonged to both of them. From the kitchen, the sound of laughter filtered in, Will and Wyatt arguing over whose pancake had the most chocolate chips. Camila, now a full family friend rather than just a nanny, refereed with the practiced patience of someone who'd seen this debate play out every weekend. Taylor stepped into the sunroom, barefoot, her robe brushing the tops of her thighs, a steaming mug in one hand. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and her eyes had that calm, rested look she only seemed to wear first thing in the morning, before the world came rushing in. "You're not even halfway through your coffee," Felix said, not looking up from the tape measure, "and you're already planning." "I'm just watching," she said, settling onto the edge of the windowsill. "You make it look easy." He marked a spot with his pencil. "It's not, but it's worth it." She sipped from her mug and let silence hang between them for a moment before saying, "I got a call from the foundation board last night." Felix set down the tape. "What now?" "They want me to serve as chair. Full control. My call on every major initiative." He turned to her, brow raised. "That's huge." "They're nervous. Our relationship didn't tank the company like everyone predicted. In fact, investor confidence has gone up. Apparently, being seen as human is good for business." He leaned against the opposite wall. "So, you take it?" I said yes. "But on one condition. I want to restructure it, make the funding more accessible to community projects outside the core cities. Trades programs, family support networks, early education. The kind of stuff that actually changes lives." Felix picked up a sanding block and ran it slowly along one of the planks. "You think they'll go for it? They already signed it. I told them if they didn't, I'd walk." He looked up at her, admiration clear in his expression. "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" "I used to be," she admitted. "Before you." She hesitated. "I don't mean that you made me fearless. I mean you showed me what I was really afraid of, not being known. Not being seen for who I actually am." Felix crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "You're seen. Every part of you. Even the ones you still try to hide." She reached for his hand and laced their fingers together. "You still want this? All of it? The foundation, the chaos, the press stories that won't die?" He bent slightly and brought his forehead to hers. "I didn't say yes to an edited version of your life. I said yes to all of it. All of you." Later that day, while the boys were building a pillow fort in the living room, Taylor took Felix to a quiet corner of the backyard where the grass had just started to sprout again after a long winter. A small white envelope rested in her hand. "I wasn't going to tell you until I was sure," she said. He took the envelope, opened it, and scanned the contents. His breath caught. "You're pregnant?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, suddenly overcome. "I found out yesterday. I wanted to wait, but I couldn't hold it in." Felix didn't speak for several seconds. He just stared at her, stunned, then pulled her into his arms and held her like the ground might shift beneath them. They stood like that for a long while, the sounds of the fort building and laughter drifting toward them from the house, a new heartbeat already beginning in secret between them. In the weeks that followed, the house transformed. Felix finished the window seat. Taylor painted the nursery with Wyatt and Will's help, though the walls ended up more polka-dotted than planned. They sent out announcements, simple cards with no fanfare, just the words, "We're growing something beautiful."
They didn't care who saw or who had something to say.
The press couldn't resist the narrative. From Blue Collar to Billionaire, the love story that redefined legacy. But the noise didn't bother them anymore. They had their own world now, one louder with laughter than criticism. One afternoon, Taylor sat in the back of the carpentry class Felix, now taught weekly at the charter school. She watched as he guided a group of 10-year-olds through a lesson on framing angles, his voice steady, his patience endless. One of the girls had trouble lining up her cut, and Felix knelt beside her, adjusting her grip gently.
"That's it," he said. "You've got this."
Taylor rested a hand on the curve of her belly, feeling the flutter of their child inside her, and smiled. When the class ended, Felix found her on the bench outside, shaded by an old maple tree. "Watching me work again?" he teased, settling beside her. "I like seeing you in your element." He glanced at her belly. "You sure sitting on a bench is still allowed?" "The baby's fine. I needed fresh air." He reached over and placed his hand gently against her side, feeling the subtle shift beneath her skin. "You ever think about how wildly improbable this all is?" she asked. "Every day. And yet, here we are." He nodded. Here we are. The wedding reception they never had took place in the garden that spring. Friends and family gathered under strings of warm lights. Taylor wore a soft cream dress with no train, no veil, just a flower tucked behind her ear, the same kind Wyatt had picked from the yard earlier that morning. Felix wore rolled-up sleeves and suspenders. They danced barefoot on the lawn, surrounded by laughter, good wine, and the people who mattered most. Wyatt gave a toast, his first ever standing on a chair, holding a glass of sparkling apple juice. "I used to think families just came the way they were," he said. "But now I know you can build one. Like a house. You just need good people, strong walls, and love so big it holds everything together." Taylor wiped a tear from her cheek. Felix pulled her close. That night, after everyone had gone home and the boys were asleep, they watched the stars from the porch swing. The air was warm, the crickets loud, and the future stretched out in front of them like a road they'd finally chosen instead of stumbled onto. "I've been thinking about names," she said quietly. "For the baby?" He leaned back.
"All right. Hit me."
She listed a few, each one met with a thoughtful pause or a quiet laugh. Then she said one that made him still. "That was my grandfather's name," he said. "I know. I read your old woodworking journal. The one with the sketch of the rocking chair. You kept that." "I kept everything," she whispered. They fell silent again, the kind of silence that needed no filling. Eventually, she turned to him. "You ever regret it? Walking up those subway stairs that day?" He laughed. "Only that I didn't do it sooner." And when he kissed her there, beneath the stars, with the scent of lilacs on the air and the steady beat of a life they'd built together, it wasn't the kind of kiss that started something. It was the kind that sealed it. A life. A family. A forever that felt entirely earned.